Let's start though by acknowledging that we're meeting on Dja Dja Wurrung country, Jandak, and pay our respect to elders past, present and future. Also too, I guess, to acknowledge that we know climate justice is something very close to the hearts of First Nations communities across our continent because of their connection to the land and their custodianship of it. And I guess too in there we acknowledge that that land has never been ceded. One of the things that we're going to be talking about, well, really the conversation that we're going to be having this afternoon is going to be about climate justice. I just want to explain there's two panels that will be speaking and I'll be convening. We're going to have a conversation around equity and justice, and Ian's begun to introduce that, which I'm really excited about. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Just the conversation that started in the, is it green room? Was exciting, and I felt like, wow, I could spend the whole afternoon chatting in here with these people, but we thought we'd come out and share that conversation with you. Do we have Slido happening? I'm not sure. They were going to try and do that so that maybe if you had any questions, you could have a think about them, and if we have time at the end, we might be able to ask the panel a question or two. But otherwise, I think we're going to have the second panel as an interfaith conversation, and the City of Greater Bendigo Climate Collaboration Team have been working across the different faith communities, the Interfaith Council, and have come up with a statement that they're going to sign. It's going to be read, it's going to be signed, and then there'll be a little panel that'll be speaking to that after our time together. So I was asked to just explain that's how the afternoon will go. At 2:45 we'll be wrapping everything up. So I hope you can stay with us for that time. I reckon it's time to introduce the panellists though. I think what we're looking at, I think Ian's already said it, was that the team, the collaboration team, interviewed over 1,000 people in the last 12 months. I know because I was one of them. Different organisations and community members about the climate and the change that's happening and what we need to do about it. And 100% or nearly 100% of feedback from every conversation, forum and workshop raised the importance of equity and climate justice. If we're going to be moving towards zero emissions, then we need to bring the whole city with us. And it can't just be that some people are on this journey. It needs to be that everybody has the opportunity, the choice, and are informed and aware and able to join together. Because we know that if we all benefit, we'll all flourish. We can't. I think it makes a better city for all of us. Anyway, that's enough from me, from my thoughts. That's what we'll be talking about today. I hope this climate justice conversation just sparks more conversations, that there'll be conversations in our homes and in our workplaces, in our neighbourhood houses and community organisations, in our churches and mosques and temples and backyards and, just all over the city, that from some of the things that you take away from what our panellists are saying, it'll help you to really, appreciate the issues that we're facing, the challenges, and also to be able to ensure that everyone is coming with us. So, with that, I'm going to start with you, Trish. Oops, sorry. Trish Curry is the CEO of Women's Health Loddon Mallee, an organisation promoting and strengthening equity and access in health and wellbeing for regional and rural women across this area. As well as holding other governance positions, Tricia chairs the Victorian Women's Health Services Network, is a member of the Loddon Campaspe Regional Partnership, and chairs the Collective Action for Respect and Equality. What better person to bring a gender equity lens to our roadmap and to our climate justice conversation this afternoon. Thank you, Trish.
Thank you, Rose.
We're very lucky to have Dr. Nicola Willand, who is Senior Lecturer and Researcher at RMIT University, the School of Property, Construction and Project Management. Nikki is an academic with a background in architecture who's interested in a holistic approach to sustainability in the built environment. Nikki is a member of the Sustainable Building Innovation Laboratory, member of the Centre for Urban Research's Health, Place and Society program, and Healthy Livable Cities Lab, and coordinator of the Housing and Health course. I was in bed late last night reading some of Nikki's papers, and I have to say they're very interesting and very accessible. I was very interested in what you were talking about. And I think it really rings true with a lot of things that I'm seeing in the neighbourhood around me. Nikki is author of numerous papers on energy vulnerability and the social aspects of sustainable built environments. Yeah, and I look forward to seeing how your perspective will fill out our understanding this afternoon. Roland Sapsford has come up from... This is your first time in regional Victoria, I hear.
It is.
Yes, I hope you feel a warm welcome and that you... Well, it's not warm, it's freezing actually. Yeah.
It's warm enough for me.
That you have a chance to have a little look around the city. Roland arrived from New Zealand in 2022. He's been engaged with climate, health and justice issues and the task of reducing emissions through both public policy and activism for more than 30 years. Examples of his work include carbon pricing and energy efficiency legislation and campaigning against major roading projects. Roland was a senior manager in public health for 5 years. He has a strong commitment to Indigenous rights, has even studied 4 years of medicine, has postgrad degrees in economics and systems ecology. Yes, so thank you for bringing a health lens to our discussion today, Roland. Jack Piper, last but not least, Climate Justice Coordinator, Community Partnerships and Development for the Jesuit Social Services Centre for Just Places. At the Centre for Just Places, Jack works closely with community services and local governments, building a shared understanding of local climate vulnerability and strengthening capacity for cross-sector collaboration on climate justice. He is a passionate advocate for the role of local community organisations like the Old Church on the Hill and neighbourhood houses in building community resilience. Jack has worked in research, climate change adaptation, regional water policy at the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, and has experience in climate-smart tech business development, both interstate and internationally. Jack, you're bringing some great experience in place-based and cross-sector collaborations to our conversation. Thank you. Okay, let's get into the questions, hey? I'm going to ask, I'll start with you, Trish, if you don't mind, with your gender lens on. What does climate justice mean for your work? Maybe what are some of the things that you're seeing in the communities that you're working with and in your work, that are showing the kind of impact of climate change already in our community?
Yeah, thanks, Rose, and thank you for that beautiful introduction and welcome. Looking forward to this conversation for sure. So when we talk about health, and we're talking about women's health specifically in this one, but when we talk about health, our organisation considers health to be a human right. So we've got a justice lens on the work that we do to start with. And in terms of being a human right, it's important that we consider that health is actually an asset for everyday living. So it's not just defined by the absence of illness. It's actually our access to the resources that we need to live well. So thinking of health from that perspective, the social determinants of health are extraordinarily important and have a huge impact. And the work we do takes a lens or takes a gendered view of the impact and the opportunities and the strengths that we can engage when it comes to promoting really good health for women and gender diverse people across our region. So just thinking about, climate justice and what does it mean? Well, it means a great deal actually, because we live in, the Loddon Valley region is absolutely evidence to the rapid changes that are happening in terms of climate influence. So, first up, I guess we were just thinking a little about energy poverty, what does that mean? So I think I've got a little anecdote for that one. I guess it came and became a reality in visiting with an elderly woman. She opens the door, I could smell something singeing. What is it? There's a white cat and it's got two stripes on it. Go into the house, into the home, and here's this elderly woman on a very cold day sitting really close to a little bar heater. And the cat, of course, was freezing as well, so it got too close and actually got singed and had a couple of stripes on it. The fact that she had every piece of clothing she could possibly wear on at the time, it sets you to thinking, doesn't it? What's happening there? And I think this is a really common story, particularly there'll be those of you who've got family members, perhaps elderly family members, but we put a gendered lens on this and we actually understand that because of some of the economic inequitable structures that are in our society, so often women get to the older stage of their lives without the resources, without the economic resources to be able to be applying many of the things that would allow them to be comfortable in their home with the use of energy. So I'm sure, again, it won't be uncommon to think about the times when, heaters are not turned on or, things sort of happen in such a way that you can see there's an incredible worry about the cost and, of course, the fact that the homes were drafty, etc. But when we come, it's putting a gender lens on it and it's thinking, okay, what does that mean for women? So the inequitable structure that's there around their access, women's access to economic stability, and of course we know the reasons behind that are many, including time out of the workforce for good periods of time, the fact that superannuation, goodness me, that's a more recent thing we can say. There are many elderly women in our communities who've not been in a paid employment throughout their lives, and their voluntary labour actually didn't count for anything when it came to their older age. So that risk of homelessness is really huge, putting it there. You don't need, or put it this way, if you're not aware, please use your imaginations to think what it would be like to go through a winter when you're homeless, or a hot summer. Another thing just to perhaps to think about is those extreme weather events. What we're seeing in the data is actually gendered violence through extreme weather events, floods, fires, the long droughts. We see family violence data absolutely skyrocketing, and so sadly across our region, including here in Greater Bendigo, the levels of family violence are totally unacceptable. And family violence occurs because of gender imbalances, those really rigid stereotypes that hold men into being, the owner of the decisions, hold women into not being decision makers, is just the start of the story. We do know how to prevent family violence, and that's an intergenerational aspiration we have and requires a whole momentum of communities working towards it. But those attitudes, those stereotypes come up in lots of other ways. So, food security, or, when we think about food choices, you think about women, body image. So social attitudes that are gendered and expect women to look in a certain way start to play very strongly on what food choices are. But there's another one to flip, another story I'd like to flip to, and it's the burnt chop. So when there is scarcity in terms of food, women who are predominantly both shop for and provide meals will actually be trading time and time again in their choices in terms of whether it's a nutritional choice or an affordable choice. When I refer to the burnt chop, it was a story shared with me some time ago, but by a wonderful farming woman who explained that, when times are tough, or which was most of the time I might add, was to say that when serving up a meal, if there was a burnt chop, that would go on mum's plate. So, just there are so many decisions in our lives that are actually those rigid gender stereotypes start to play out, and
Thanks,
the inequities are many.
That's a great, thanks so much for highlighting those things. I'm sure you've probably got some other things there that you could bring up as well, but I think we might need to move on and hear from some of our other panellists. So, Nikki, I might pop over to you now. And I know that you're working very much in this climate justice space. You're about to go to Europe to focus on some energy vulnerability work, I heard. So yeah, I think you could probably talk to us for a long time about it. But I wonder if you could tell us how climate justice, what does it mean for your work, and what are you seeing from your perspective?
Thank you. So climate justice in my work is about the adverse effects of climate change, but also those unintended consequences of the low carbon transition that is actually there to mitigate climate change. And when we look at justice, we look at three principles. One is recognition, which is about recognizing the causes and conditions of disadvantaged, vulnerable groups and what matters to them. So very often this focus on the technological solution doesn't take into consideration that the dwelling, this material entity, is also a home, and it's got social meanings, cultural significance, and it's part of everyday practices. And energy for many households is just one aspect when they look at the quality of the home. So recognizing that it's not just about switching or reducing less. It's got meanings and significance within lives. But it's also about recognizing that the programs that we've got, like energy concessions, for example, recognize certain population groups and not others. So, for example, the working poor, they don't get help. We call them people in hidden energy vulnerability. If you don't self-identify and say, I need help because you're too proud, then you don't get energy assistance. And some people actually hide their struggles quite intentionally because they're afraid, for example, that child protection may remove the child because there's no working fridge because the family is disconnected. Then the second principle of justice is distribution. So we look at uneven distribution of benefits and burdens in the low carbon transition. So for example, there are population groups that have a pre-existing disadvantage. They're living in less thermally efficient homes or less quality homes, like renters. They've got limited access to initiatives, subsidies, because they lack agency, they lack income, they've got low wealth, so no financial reserves, they lack the capabilities and understanding of how to access certain things, so they've got limited access to help. And then there is the cross-subsidization of initiatives. Or when people are leaving the gas grid, for example, then the infrastructure is redistributed to everyone who's left behind. So these people are actually experiencing a triple disadvantage to very extreme cases. And then we're looking at procedural justice, which looks at who's involved in decision making. And again, it's very uneven. The leadership roles are not distributed across the population group, so it's not reflecting the diversity in the population group. But even within households, there are power imbalances. Who makes the decisions? So gender comes in there as well. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Nikki. Roland, jump to you. I know you work for the peak body for health and climate change.
Yes, I thought I might just introduce the Climate and Health Alliance to
Sure.
people. CAHA is the peak body for climate and health work in Australia, and basically we're a national organisation. We're a very small group who basically coordinate our organisational members to try and use the health voice, which is a trusted voice in society, we're told by surveys, to mobilise the kind of change and transformation that's needed to produce a healthy, resilient and just society. I'm here to talk about climate and health perspective, and I guess I just want to start though by acknowledging, as a recent arrival in Australia, I continue to be in awe that I am standing on the land of the oldest continuous civilization on Earth, and that's personally very humbling. And I want to pay my respects, I guess, to the Indigenous people of this country who not only have a legacy which is beyond comprehension in terms of time, but also have shown extraordinary resilience in the face of 200 years of colonisation, and their strength and robustness is something from which we should draw in thinking about how we as a nation and a society deal with the challenge of climate change. From a health perspective, someone in the foyer I was talking to said, what are the most significant health impacts of climate change? And I guess I would like to start by just laying out a little bit of that ground, that climate change, we know, leads to increased frequency of extreme weather events, heat, floods, fire associated with floods, and we're now seeing feedback. Some of you may have seen the research which shows that the 2019 megafires entered the global atmospheric circulation and actually made the floods which followed after more likely. In other words, the smoke from 2019 led in some ways to the floods that were experienced in the early parts of this decade. So we're seeing kind of reinforcing climate change impacts there. Beyond that, we also see impacts on food availability and security, water availability, and the spread of diseases, both through vector-borne diseases and directly. And those in turn lead to health impacts like the most obvious is heat-related illness, respiratory illness, malnutrition, water and animal-borne diseases, mental challenges and psychosocial impacts and real impacts on cultural well-being. And those impacts are felt most acutely by those groups in society who, because of social exclusion, economic security or racism, are already having their strength and resilience challenged by those existing factors. So there's a multiplier effect there in terms of the health impacts of climate change being overlaid with existing inequities in our society. That's broadly an overview of the health perspective on climate justice, which is simply to say that if we think of health, as was said earlier, as a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, and we understand that surviving, thriving as a community and society is a collective property, then the things which uplift the health of those who are experiencing the effects of climate change first are likely to be the things that will be beneficial for all. So we have a collective interest, not just a moral imperative, but a collective interest in ensuring that we act together to protect our health in the face of climate change. And I would just close that off by saying we face a very difficult time because climate change is here now. And so we are trying to, and I just wanted to read this little quote because I think it's useful. We have to reduce emissions and cope with worsening climate instability at the same time. Our decisions today and our future plans must both mitigate the worst effects of climate change and adapt to those which are already in train. So this isn't fair and it isn't easy, but it is possible if we work together and bring kindness, inclusion and clarity of purpose.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great, Roland. Jack.
So I thought I'd start just talking a bit about what we're seeing at a high level through the data. So Jesuit Social Services for 20 years now has been mapping indicators of disadvantage across every postcode in Australia. We call this the dropping off the edge research. And in the latest iteration, we included environmental indicators. And what it showed is that it's the same postcodes who are experiencing the highest burden of social disadvantage who are also experiencing environmental injustices. So for example, in areas of Melbourne's west, we're seeing high levels of heat stress, low levels of green canopy cover, high levels of poor air quality in terms of the rankings, along with housing stress, overcrowdedness, high levels of mental health issues. So the Centre for Just Places, where I work, was established in 2021 to look at best practice in place-based approaches to addressing this pattern of intersecting locational disadvantage and really by harnessing the strengths in communities as well. And the climate justice team that I'm in looks at these place-based approaches to address issues at this intersection of social and environmental justice. And a lot of that work in the climate justice program, we work with community service and health organisations, we work with local governments, and we bring people together in a place to think about, well, who's at risk in this community, but more importantly, why are they at risk? And in terms of the impacts we see in people's lives through that work, I'd say there's two key things. One is that there are, of course, the direct impacts of climate change, but these cascade into more subtle but just as serious consequences. But secondly, that climate change exacerbates existing vulnerabilities. So it's an amplifier of the social injustice that we already see in our society. And there's numerous examples of how that plays out. But one story we heard of, a group of young boys of colour trying to escape the heat, going into a shopping mall just to be in a cool space. But they were followed around by security and then eventually asked to leave. And so we see their ability to adapt, their capacity to adapt, their options are minimised by systemic racism, which is already very alive and well in our community, unfortunately. But similarly, talking to an older person who lives alone, who already experiences social isolation in their life, we're talking to them about their lived experience of climate change. This was a big engagement project to inform a council's adaptation plan. She was saying that on those hot days where she can't get to that weekly social program at the community health organisation because it's unsafe to leave her house, not only is she feeling lonely, but she actually shared that sometimes in those hot days she's unwell and she's scared to die alone. Like it's the mental health impacts are very significant. And what we're seeing, I'd say, speaks to the need to address the underlying drivers of vulnerability. So it's not just about emergency preparedness, installing air conditioners and solar and batteries in every household. Climate justice is about addressing those underlying drivers that make one person more at risk than another, whether that's dealing with systemic racism or building connections within a community to break down social isolation. Tricia, what you were saying made me think about, the need to shape healthy masculinities. These are climate change adaptation exercises when you put a justice lens on this. And I think I'd just say, just as a last note, is that this is the work that community services and health services are doing every day. Working with community to address these intersecting needs and working with community based on their strengths to do that.
Great, thanks, Jade. Great stuff, hey? I think we've run out of time, well and truly, for our second question. So I'm just going to ask you to just say one thing each, and as a dot point, if that's possible. I know there's a lot more we could do, but I also would ask you to make sure you don't leave without putting your thoughts onto the roadmap as well, because everybody here has the opportunity to have input into the roadmap. This is an opportunity now that we're hoping people are going to take up to really make it our plan and something that makes sure that it's got climate equity all the way through it. So, if you haven't had an opportunity to say anything here on stage, everything, make sure you put it onto the roadmap before you leave. Tricia, what is one thing, how, with your women's health and gender focus, how can climate justice be embedded in the roadmap to zero emissions?
Yeah, beautiful. Well, firstly, congratulations on the draft and where it's at to all of those who've been collaborating and getting that movement happening.
1 point.
One thing, it's going to be two, because the first thing is going to be disaggregated data. We need to drill into the data to tell us what it is that, when you put that gendered lens on, what it is that perhaps is not being seen and could be seen and can be adapted. The adaptive management's absolutely there. And it's just so important. The other bit is with that data, looking to see what does the data not tell us? So please look for the lived experience, as we say, of women and gender diverse people, understanding the compounding impact of intersectional the experience of women and gender diverse people with an
Thanks,
intersectional
Trish.
lens.
Yeah, thank you. Nikki?
When it comes to recognition, to recognise that vulnerability is not just a question of money and resources, but it's about being able to live in an efficient home, being able to negotiate the energy market. So looking at capabilities and using those intermediaries, the frontline workers like maternal and child health nurses, to identify householders that are struggling. When it comes to initiatives to look at a democratic approach that has got a targeted focus on vulnerable households rather than a utilitarian approach that everyone can get it. And then from a procedural point of view, to involve diverse voices, women, marginalised households, to hear everyone and to drill down into those things that remain hidden, and that at the end it's a better world. So using that transition as an opportunity for social justice.
Great, thank you. Roland?
The roadmap is an extraordinary piece of work. I was reading it on the train up here today, and I applaud people for the work and thought that's gone into it. Two really practical things from a health point of view. One is housing. Healthy homes with stable temperatures that are dry with minimal indoor air pollution. There's work in there. Please carry on with that. That makes a huge contribution to well-being, and it helps the most vulnerable, the people who are most at risk. And the other is transport. There's some really good stuff in there, but the vision of healthy transport choices, if you have communities where walking and cycling are easier, where public transport is accessible, where there are fewer fossil fuel cars, which means less air pollution, less noise, fewer accidents, less isolation. There are so many win-wins for justice, for health and for climate in transport that I really encourage you to embrace that.
Thanks, Roland. Jack?
One thing I would probably say is that this just transition that is within this roadmap, the just transition is about the process. It's how we get there. It's not just the destination. And so I'd want to embed climate justice in the journey to zero emissions. And I'd say the most important aspect of that is to respect that the community knows best what they need, and that we need to hand power and decision making over to the community, but recognise that there are systemic barriers in place that make it some voices less able to be heard. And just one last plug again is that really there's this amazing social asset out there to support those voices to be heard, and that is the community and health sector. They hold those trusted relationships with community members who are often harder to reach or who are facing these systemic barriers, and to really work with them to ensure that they are heard. Yeah.
Thanks, Jack. Everybody, let's put our hands together for our panel. It's been gold. I wish that I could have extended each of the time frames that we have, but we're ready for the next panel now, so I'm going to have to ask you to move. And the next, I think Chris Core is going to pop in the transition and tell us a little bit about something, electric bikes or something.
Hi, good afternoon everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity and a fantastic conference here. So my name's Chris Core from the Bendigo Sustainability Group, and I just wanted to say a few brief words about our Giving Power program that we've currently got running. So the Minister this morning, in her words, said that we must be really careful with our renewable energy transition, that we don't leave anyone behind, and that certainly is absolutely critically important. There are about 40,000 households in the Loddon Mallee region alone that fit into the owner-occupied, low or very low income categories. So all these households are going to be struggling with the rising energy costs and rising everyday costs that we're experiencing, and they are in danger of being left behind. So the Bendigo Sustainability Group, along with partners, the Bendigo Community Health Services, with some support funding from the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Adaptation, have developed a project to work with these households, and we've tagged that Giving Power. So this program will install approximately 3 kilowatt solar systems on homes of low-income households and families in initially the Bendigo area. We'd love to expand that to the Loddon Mallee region, and that will be at no cost to those homeowners. The Bendigo Community Health Services are working with us to, to assess and to vet and make sure they're fitting into the categories that are eligible for the program. So we need to raise $63,000 from the community, from business and individuals, to fund these solar systems on this 30 plus households. So we're really asking for support for that. Certainly with more funding we could install more solar on more households, and that'd be a fantastic outcome. So everyone, please donate, consider donating to the Giving Power program. Please spread the word. Please ask friends, family and neighbours to contribute as well. You can donate directly via the Chuffed site, also via the BSG website and Facebook and social media pages. There's information there as well. If you go to the BSG stall and table here, you can get information on that. There's also flyers and posters that you can distribute amongst your networks and communities. So please support the campaign. That would be fantastic. Thanks very much.
Chris, getting the table set up now for the signing. As Ian mentioned, the Greater Bendigo Climate Collaboration Team have been working closely with faith leaders, and they've come up with a climate statement that I'm going to invite someone to read out. I'll tell you who in a minute. And also we're going to have representatives from different faith organisations come up and sign it today, and then they'll have a photo, and we're having some faith leaders from the community join us just to answer a couple of questions about what they're planning to do and reflect a little on the statement. So maybe, yes, here we have Monsignor Frank Marriott, OAM. Nice to see you, Frank. Frank is the founding chair of the Interfaith Council. And the Interfaith Council, from what I understand, came together at a time when the city faced a different crisis. And here it's come together to address climate change. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the statement, Frank. You're going to read it. I also need to acknowledge that the faith leaders have adapted to the local context this statement from a statement that the World Council of Churches and Religions for Peace have already made. So thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Rose, and good afternoon, everyone. This statement is on behalf of Greater Bendigo Faith Statement in support of the Greater Bendigo Zero Emissions Roadmap. So as representatives from the different faith and religious traditions in Greater Bendigo, we stand together to express deep concern for the consequences of climate change on the earth and on its people, all entrusted, as our faiths reveal, to our common care. Climate change is indeed a threat to life, a precious gift we have received and that we need to care for. We acknowledge the overwhelming scientific evidence that climate change is human-induced, and that without global and inclusive action towards mitigation, and unless fully addressing its fundamental causes, its impacts will continue to grow in intensity and frequency. At the same time, we are ready to dialogue with those who remain sceptical. In our communities, and thanks to the media, we see the manifestations of climate change everywhere. From our brothers and sisters around the world, we hear about its effects on people and nature. We recognise that these effects disproportionately affect the lives, the livelihoods and the rights of poorer, marginalised and therefore most vulnerable populations, including First Nations peoples. When those who have done the least to cause climate change are the ones who are hardest hit, it becomes an issue of injustice. equitable solutions are urgently needed. As faith communities, we are committed to standing beside the poor and the vulnerable. We recognise that climate change stands today as a major obstacle to the eradication of poverty. Severe weather events exacerbate hunger. They cause economic insecurity, forced displacement, and prevent sustainable development. The climate crisis is a severe threat to the health and well-being of all life on planet Earth, and action must reflect these facts with urgency. As communities in Bendigo, we are only too aware that these impacts of climate exist not just overseas, but here in Greater Bendigo. We've seen the impacts of flooding and bushfires on our communities. And we share concerns about the projected future impacts of climate change on Greater Bendigo, including reductions in rainfall, hotter days and maximum temperatures, longer periods of extreme heat in summer, and longer fire seasons, along with more frequent extreme events. Now, these events will also impact our ability to support those experiencing poverty in our region and to improve equity and well-being in our community. Therefore, as faith leaders, we commit ourselves to the promotion of disaster risk reduction, adaptation, low carbon development, climate change education, curbing our own consumption patterns, and reducing our use of fossil fuels. Based on our spiritual beliefs and our hopes for the future, we commit to stimulating consciences and encouraging our peers and communities to consider such measures with urgency. We are encouraged by the work of the Greater Bendigo Climate Collaboration to help all sectors of our community to come together towards achieving zero emissions by 2030. We acknowledge both the challenges and opportunities that this challenge presents, and we are excited by the collaboration vision for Greater Bendigo as a zero emissions city, and also for the benefits a renewable energy powered economy will bring our community, including jobs, improved health, and strengthening our communities, local business innovation and competitiveness. We know that alone climate change can feel overwhelming and scary, but together we can make real change. Bendigo is blessed to be in the position to provide a leadership role in climate action as a large regional city that is smart, collaborative, and has a track record of innovation. We are proud to be part of this community and excited to see what we can achieve together. And so, in the spirit of hope and prayer, and as religious representatives and citizens in our community, we commend the Greater Bendigo Zero Emissions Roadmap to our community and commit to supporting the actions it proposes and encouraging our faith communities to do the same.
Beautiful.
Thanks,
Thank
Rose.
you, Frank, and the rest of the team. I'm now going to invite some of the senior faith organisation leaders who are going to sign the statement. Here it is. You can already see that some have signed it already. Bishop Shane McKinlay to sign on behalf of the Catholic Diocese of Sandhurst. Imam Atala Kawalda to sign on behalf of the Bendigo Islamic Community Centre. Community Chaplain Lauren Lockwood Porter to sign on behalf of the Anglican Diocese of Bendigo. And Reverend Ken Rooks to sign on behalf of the Uniting Church in Australia, Presbytery of Loddon Mallee. Finally, he wasn't able to be here today, but Ian Green, Chairman and Director of the Great Stupor of Universal Compassion, has also signed the statement on their behalf. And as you can see, some other keen people have already signed too. After today's launch, this statement will be taken more broadly to other faith communities and organisations, and there'll be opportunity for people to sign that. So I hope that you get an opportunity to do that at some point. This is a really exciting and historic moment for our faith communities in Bendigo, collaborating together for community resilience. So I think Shane's going to come up and take a photo of you. Shane, do you mind doing that? Where would you like people to be for that? Thanks very much. I'm now going to invite the panellists to come up. So first of all, Ms. Kerry Stone from the Sandhurst Diocese. She's the Sandhurst Diocese Coordinator for Caritas Australia and Justice Issues, Chair of Sandhurst Care for Creation Team, and the National Catholic Earth Care Parishes Coordinator. Thank you for joining us, Kerry. I'm going to invite Mr. Samir Sayed, President of the Bendigo Islamic Association and Vice President of the Bendigo Islamic Community Centre. Nice to see you, Samir. Thank you for joining us. And then Mr. Jonathan Cornford, co-founder of Manigum, an independent Christian non-profit organisation focused on faith and economics with the tagline, Enough for All. Thanks, Jonathan, for joining us. Yeah, I should also say too, Ian Green from the Great Stupor of Universal Compassion was not able to join us, so we're going to imagine that he's sitting in that red chair there, but he has left me some notes that I'll refer to later just to speak to what they're doing. I think we're just adjusting a microphone there. So yeah, I'm just going to ask two questions of you. The first one is what you think the role of faith organisations could be in a zero-emission city. What sort of role do you think faith communities could have in this work? Yeah, I'm going to start with you, Kerry.
Thank you. Well, I see our role as leading people to see the earth as our common home, and to understanding the moral and ethical obligation to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor.
Beautiful, yeah. So kind of giving a bigger reason for caring for the earth, okay? Samir, can you speak to that from your
Yeah, look, before I can answer that question,
Sure.
I guess a bit of perspective from an Islamic faith. Using the Quran, the Holy Book, as a divine guidance, there's two principles it establishes. Firstly, we are stewards on this earth. We do not have dominion over the planet. And secondly, the concept of what's called israf, the excessive use of resources. So that is a big no-no in terms of the Quranic guidance. So we want to use these two principles to instill in our followers. You know, this is part of your religious obligation. It's not just a social thing or a charitable act, but it's actually a religious obligation, a social necessity. So again, yeah, we would take that leadership role and just honing in on that.
Beautiful.
On that
Yeah.
idea.
Thank you, Samir. That's great. Jonathan, over to you. What do you think?
Well, I'm coming up from a different angle. We're part of I guess you call it an affluent consumer society, of which the individual is at the heart of that. And a lot of the resistance we've had in Australia to making the sorts of changes we need in terms of climate change has come from the fear that those changes will have for people's quality of life, or the Australian way of life, and the way we imagine the Australian life has become something of a political sacred cow, if you like, that can't be touched. And right at the heart of that when we think about the Australian life, which is essentially a high income, high consumer life, is a set of pretty core values about what the meaning of life is, what's good, what's valuable in life, and they're essentially values and spiritual questions. And so right at the heart of all the different economic and policy challenges we need to address climate change, we actually need something akin to a spiritual conversion, and that is really the core business of faith organisations. And that's one area where we have a wealth to offer, I think.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, interesting. We've heard some great, I think, well, I guess also too, just seeing the different communities coming together faith communities coming together to sign that. It's exciting to think about what that might look like in practice at a grassroots level. Just hearing what you three have said there about the role that faith communities can play, I'm excited about what that might look like. My last question for you is just with regards to your own faith groups here in Bendigo and where you're connected. What is your faith group doing to contribute to a zero emissions Greater Bendigo? And I have a list here too from Ian as well, so I'll pop that in maybe at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, but Kerry, do you want to start with that? Yeah.
Okay. Well, in 2015, Pope Francis wrote a letter to the world entitled Laudato Si', or more easily, On Care for Our Common Home. And this was then the inspiration for producing the Laudato Si' goals. 7 goals for 7 sectors, including parishes, families, dioceses, schools, business, agriculture and hospitals. And the 7 goals are response to the cry of the earth, response to the cry of the poor, ecological economics, adoption of sustainable lifestyles, ecological education, ecological spirituality, and community resilience and empowerment. And the Australian bishops have committed to these goals. So Catholic Earth Care, a program of the Bishops' Agency, Caritas Australia, has created stepped certification programs for families, schools, organisations and parishes, offering the tools and resources for this journey towards total sustainability in the spirit of integral ecology. In the City of Greater Bendigo, the Earth Care Network includes, under organisations, the Chancery and Catholic Education Sandhurst, under parishes, the Cathedral Parish, Kangaroo Flat, Quarry Hill, Kennington and St Killian's parishes, under schools, Catherine Macaulay College, Marist College, St Killian's Bendigo, St Peter's North Bendigo, St Teresa's Kennington, St Francis of the Fields, Strathfield Say and Old Primary School in Elmore. When they sign up to Earth Care, there's a wide-ranging audit, followed by planning documents and accompanied by a supportive network of Zooms and newsletters. In responding to the goals, Earthcare parishes, schools and organisations are looking at a really wide range of activities, many achieved, many in progress. To name just a few, developing their relationships with First Nations people, hosting discussions to learn more about renewable energies, adapting office activities to minimise single-use paper, using environmentally friendly and ethically sourced products like tea, coffee and cleaning products, avoiding single-use plastics, particularly in hospitality or catering, commissioning energy consultants to assess efficiency of buildings, installing or renewing insulation or fitting draft excluders, switching off appliances at the wall each day, installing timers or sensors, installing solar panels where possible. They're already on the Chancery and Quarry Hill Church. We're restricted by heritage on churches like the Cathedral and St Killian's, but they are on the presbyteries. They're on schools at Strathfield Say, Kennington, Quarry Hill, planned at St Peter's, and there's others in the planning. Installing solar block blinds on north and west windows, planting native species, regenerating areas of parish land and encouraging biodiversity where possible, establishing herb gardens, installing water tanks for gardens, using compost bins and green bins. Under Goal 5, ecological education includes adding sustainability tips to bulletins and newsletters, raising awareness of ecological justice days like National Recycling Week and Clean Up Australia Day. Under Goal 6, which is ecological spirituality, it means we're including creation-centred prayers in the weekly prayers, encouraging reading and discussion of the work of eco-theologians, planning outdoor liturgies on occasion, and creating outdoor spaces for prayer and reflection, and learning about integral ecology. Under Goal 7, which is planning or working with others, it's like our First Nations people, the Australian Conservation Foundation, or the City of Greater Bendigo, for example, participating in advocacy campaigns, relevant rallies or petitions, and a range of other activities. As I said, many achieved, many in progress, which will all support the journey to zero by 2030.
That sounds like a great collection of activity. You've been very busy, I can see that, and that's really good. Yep. Samir, you've been building a beautiful mosque out there, but I'm sure you've been doing other things as well, talking about care for the environment as part of your teaching and encouraging your flock, your congregation to really live it. Yeah, so tell me what's happening in your patch.
Yeah, look, I'll talk about the mosque
Sure,
at the end.
yeah.
There's a lot we can do. Right now, we implemented this probably a couple of years back. We want to introduce this constant messaging, regular messaging that, the environment, is a religious obligation. We found this based on a study that was actually done by University of Kent. They did a study on Indonesia where what they found was the mosque was more effective in engaging people about climate change than government guidance and campaigns and so forth. So we've taken on that. Our Imam, every now and again, his Friday sermons talk about climate change and how, as Muslims, we are responsible for the earth and how we will be held accountable. So that hones in that, the responsibility that we've got to actually do something about it and be proud of it, and that becomes not only a spiritual or social thing, but it's an act of worship. So that's been very, very effective. The second thing we've done is in our children's education program, every Sunday we have Islamic studies classes for our kids. So, talk to the kids about the environment. They hear about the environment at school, but from an Islamic perspective, again, bringing in the guidance from the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, again, making that, holistic connection about the environment. The third thing, which was quite interesting, Muslims make up about 1/5 of the Earth's population. So again, reminding Muslims to invest in ethical projects, environmentally irresponsible projects, stay away from. So that makes a big difference around the world. So that's something that started in Australia, and North America. It's been pretty successful. Coming to the mosque though, now we are still under construction phase, but that gives us opportunity now to plan and really plan for the future and target zero emissions. We want that facility to be, fully compliant to zero emissions. We already have big plans to plant over 100 trees. I think roughly around 180 trees and native plants to offset carbon emissions. There's, we want to be off the grid, have our own solar power and water and so forth. So there are a number of things that we're pushing our architect and our builder to incorporate in those plans, and we're lucky to be at a time where there is abundant information and that we can draw on that and then implement it to our MOS project.
Great. It's excellent when the building, like even in that building process, you're modelling how to implement some of this statement that we've been looking at today.
Absolutely.
Jonathan, I think of you as a bit of an eco-theologian myself. I don't know if many people have read any of Jonathan's books, but I'd strongly recommend them if you have a faith and you're interested in eco-theology. Just from your work, what are you seeing and doing in the climate justice space?
So I guess a lot of the focus of my work has been, working in church world, in the Christian world, helping Christians and churches really recover the wealth of teaching and thinking that's gone on over a couple of thousand years of thinking about where economic life fits into life and how we should structure that for and from which we derive ideas like social justice and the common good, and how we relate that to the natural world. It's, I guess, a little bit to our shame that a lot of Christians in Australia don't really know about this wealth of tradition that we have and teaching and learning, which is of great value in thinking about climate change, both in terms of thinking about what we've got to do in terms of wisdom about how we structure economic life and pretty basic questions of justice, how we think about property and things like that, but even at a more fundamental level, questions of how we relate, how did we get here in the first place? Not just the scientific question of, well, how did climate change happen, but the human question of how did we do this? What is it? Trying to understand the human condition and how we can think about how we move on from here. So there's a wealth of tradition at that deeper level, but then actually a lot of that translates into very practical stuff too. So a lot of in that tradition about how people live day to day. So our everyday economics as households and individuals, how we perform around those. So a lot of what Manigum does is to educate Christian households about thinking about what it means to live in a world of changing climate, in a integrated global consumer economy, and in which we all share the same climate and a global ecology. What it means to do that responsibly, and taking responsibility for our own actions and making sure we're not asking politicians to make changes that we haven't been willing to make ourselves first. So thinking about that, so understanding at a very nitty-gritty, fine-grained level what it means to live in relation to the earth and relation to each other in our day-to-day economic lives. But then we can scale that up to another step to Christians generally congregate in churches. So they're a little faith community, and that's also actually an economic community, and they usually have a building as well, and we've been hearing there's lots that goes on around those buildings, and they need to be made sustainable. But they're also participants in civil society, so they actually have some sort of political responsibility as a community group to be active, so especially in a context like Bendigo, where the city council, churches are groups that can be part of that voice, and as are individual members of those churches, political citizens. So encouraging people and churches together to take responsibility for their political citizenship as well.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Hey, well, we have run out of time now, but I just wanted to say that, I'm excited to think about what it might look like at a grassroots level, knowing that we're having these sort of conversations and wondering how this is going to reflect in the conversations that we're having around our dinner tables and the conversations that we're having in our neighbourhoods and in our places of worship and in our schools and in other places. So yeah, thank you for your commitment to that, for being willing to sign this, and yeah, I look forward to seeing what we do as a city with faith organisations also thinking and having these conversations. And I think too, just I guess to acknowledge that you are here because you do have faith that things could be different, and that's also encouraging. So thank you for your time with us today. Yep.